Hello and welcome to all the ghouls and vampires out there. Zoinks! I'm your host, Joe. Here with me is my co-host, Dan.
Re-ring.
Jinkies, that was a great comment, Dan. You said it all. All right. Honestly, we both kind of grew up with Scooby Doo.
Who hasn't?
I remember as a kid at 4 or 5, I saw this one, I think it was a ghost episode or something, the hypnotist episode, and it actually, I think, gave me nightmares. And there was a witch episode that gave me nightmares. And the two episodes blurred together in my mind, and I had the nightmares for weeks. But what's funny is that I never lost my love for Scooby Doo. And it took me about 2 years or 3 years to watch Scooby Doo again, and then I watched it, and I just became an avid fanboy. And you were really into Laugh Olympics.
Oh god, that's
helped.
funny.
I loved Laugh Olympics. That helped me overcome that fear. But then, like at least I was about 10 or 12 or something, in that age gap, Scooby Doo, the live action movie, came out, and that one's really good. We'll review that one at some point. It's a great movie. Captures the spirit of Scooby Doo. Although I find the Scrappy bashing a little harsh now, but I get why some people found Scrappy eventually a little annoying. I don't understand the hatred for the character. I'm not saying I like the character, I'm just kind of, man, it seems harsh. That aside, weirdly, the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo never scared me. I loved that show as a kid. It's just, our family has a long Scooby Doo heritage, I guess you could say. Our mom loved the show when she was raising us. Our dad loved listening to it, even though he was a grown man. He didn't have much patience for make-believe stories all that often. Well, he liked fantasy, but he didn't like kiddie stuff, but he liked Scooby Doo. I do remember that. And what's funny is that with this show, a lot of people in the West grew up with this. And Scooby Doo, our family would watch it in English. Then I remember at one point we'd switch the channel to the French channel and watch it in French. I do remember we did that when I was between the ages of 3 and 10 years old or something. And it was a fun experience. Scooby Doo on Zombie Island, I remember watching it when it first came out, had nightmares. I was a bit of a wuss about it. But then, when I was about 14, I decided I want to rewatch this, because to prove I'm a man. Yeah, you're a man at 14. And I remember going, that was it? That wasn't scary. That was kind of boring to an extent. And that was just me at 14. But then I rewatched it when I was a few years older. And, sorry. Some of the noise in the background is our own Scooby Doo. He's just banging about wanting attention and Scooby snacks. But the thing with Zombie Island is it's really supposed to be at the end of the timeline where the team is basically nearing 30. Not like in the flashback story where we see them cracking a mystery. That part, they're still in college or whatever. But by the time the story of Zombie Island takes place, they're pretty much nearing 30. They've put Mystery Machine behind them, and they've moved on with their lives for a while. But then they get the idea to come back because their best times were together, and they're really a family. So they decide to come back and have a last hurrah. And at the end, they find the closure they were longing for so very desperately. And I like that each of them got a special arc. And we find out a lot about the characters from the smallest of actions. At some point, maybe we should do a shot-for-shot analysis of this movie. It's a fascinating one in terms of the Scooby-Doo legacy.
Yeah, that'd be actually pretty fun.
And it'd be pretty wholesome for the most part. Although, real quick before we really start the serious part of the review, I think it was the Daphne actress who died 2 years after this film.
Really?
Yeah. So this was last time I think she did Daphne. I think it was her or the Velma actress, and I think it was suicide or something. I read that up somewhere, and it was just heart-wrenching. It broke my heart to find out about that. I think it was the Daphne actress, and she was struggling. Poor girl. Poor lady. Anyways, this movie is a beautiful one. At the start, you have Daphne who's become a reporter, and she's turned her time with the Mystery Inc. into a lucrative reporting gig. Velma went on to be a great mystery writer and book collector and book saleswoman, but she's ultimately getting bored as she's as a writer, and she's just bored with selling mysteries. Freddie has become the single one-man army producer for Daphne's show From Coast to Coast, and apparently, as they show, Freddie is too shy to get in front of the camera himself. I really like this over the Glory Hog side of him in the live-action movie. That was a good approach they did in the movie, but I like the... I just find it funny that he's got the looks of like a Brad Pitt back in the day.
And he's a bit of a dandy.
But, and as much as he was really smart in the original series. Him and Velma were always the ones putting together the mystery, figuring out the trap, but he's too shy to get in front of the camera and actually take the credit. So that's why basically Daphne, who's the most photogenic one on the team, and Velma took the credit. Where I just find it a little heartwarming and a little interesting because it gives Freddie an arc. Where the reason he never became famous like Velma and Daphne was because he was too shy. He didn't have the guts, so to speak, to do it. But at the end of this movie, he's finally able to stand up and take the credit for his accomplishments. Which I like that arc, where he grows over the course of this movie. But you also see that, at least I thought I saw, like, how he seems to, while he's enjoying being alone with Daphne, because obviously her and him are basically an item throughout the movie, he's obviously missing Velma and Shaggy. And I like that in this movie, him and Shaggy really have a bromance. And Freddy seems like the one who sometimes spoils Scooby Doo a little rotten alongside Velma. Well, not as much as Velma. Velma spoils Scooby Doo a lot. And Velma in this movie is just at her sweetest. She's so kind. She's such a sweetheart. I love Velma in this movie. I almost did a Freudian slip with Daphne. But Velma in this movie is probably right behind Shaggy and Scooby as my favorite character in this film. Shaggy and Scooby are, of course, the best. They're always the funnest. Daphne, I like that she has a lot of the sweetness and girlishness of her 70s and 80s interpretations, but with the action girl and the flightiness of the more recent adaptations. And so you really get the perfect blend between the two. And she's just utterly lovable, and you get the sense that she's the most naive one on the team in a way. That Scooby and Shaggy just want to enjoy life and their friends and whatnot company. Velma's on a journey to try to find closure, but also Velma's wanting to crack some more mysteries. She wants to break the monotony in her life. Freddy is out to kind of, I think, find it in himself to finally tie the knot with Daphne, but also like Velma, kind of try to break the monotony and find himself. Daphne is not looking for herself like Freddy and Velma are. What she's looking for is as in her words, a real live ghost, which is an oxymoron, as Velma points out.
Shaggy and Scooby, they're in a rut. They mentioned that, Shaggy mentioned that they're going from job to job, and...
Oh, yeah. They've not been able to hold any gig down.
Because their passion is lost. And as much as they hated being scared, they just wanted to be with their family.
Yeah. So that this movie kind of gives closure to the murder mystery side of Mystery Inc. And it's such a shame that the sequels to this movie, I think there were 3 or 4 of them, I kind of prefer to put them in the middle of the film. Like, they're part of the montage of Mysteries That Are Solved. I think that those films belong there, in the middle of this film, and that this film gives the best send-off for the Mystery Inc. group. Now, naturally, everyone knows this film who's familiar with Scooby Doo. It's a great horror film. It's a great Scooby Doo film. You have a detective who's trying to figure out why people are going missing by the hundreds in the Bayou Island off the shore of uh, Nouvelle Orleans, and this guy called Beau Neville is Neville is really stumped, so he's gone undercover as a gardener, and apparently he's a really, really, really good gardener at that. Because you look at the flowers and the plants around that place that they show, like, wow. And the animation in this film is at its best. It's Scooby Doo at its best in terms of animation art.
It's a mix between the classic Scooby Doo and a much more 90s style
modern animated flick. But it feels very Western. But I think there was a Japanese company involved in the animation and the art, but they were aiming for a Western animation style because they wanted to capture the essence of Scooby Doo. It was very respectfully done. It was very beautiful and whatnot. And naturally, the team have cat people such as Simon and the other two, I forget their names, who scheme of draining the life force from them. And their desecration of people's souls is the source of the zombies. Because the zombies cannot leave and cross over like they are supposed to do because of the violation to their spirits that is inflicted upon them. They are trapped and, to an extent, the slaves of these cat people. In turn, Simon and the other girl they recount their tale that they were originally cat-worshipping pagan people who had settled on the island, but that Morgan Moonscar, near the early 17th century, probably around the year 1600 or so, between there and probably the early 18th century, ended up kind of... Well, yeah, he caused the death of a lot of the locals, which was an unjust crime. But then the two ended up deciding to get the aid of their cat god in order to slay Moonscar. But then they carried that crime along by attacking some peaceful farmers who later settled there and killing them. And then a Confederate regiment placed there to protect the region, because something a lot of people forget about the American Civil War is that while the cause of the Union Army was just in the context of freeing the slaves of the South, in that regard, I don't think anyone can argue that justice in that regard was on the side of the Union Army. Now, some of the peasants of the Confederate side were trying to fight against centralized authority, and they preferred a more decentralized government, not a top-heavy kind of system of governance, and they wanted generally to be left alone. And they didn't want government officials running around everywhere and basically overtaking everyone's lives, and they were fighting to defend their families and homes. So in that regard, you can kind of understand some of them. Now, I'm just saying this in the context of this film, as the Confederate army that was stationed on that island were probably not fighting for slavery like a lot of members of the Confederate army were. Let's be honest, there was a lot of people in the Confederate army that were fighting for that unjust cause. Just as there were some who were just simply fighting to defend their families, because there were a few Union armies that were raised under independent generals who ended up massacring entire villages and towns for no other reason than just cause. And they massacred both white and black people without a care in the world for the consequences of their actions. And they glorified their actions. Now, I'm just saying that the American Civil War was a complex theater of wars, so to speak. But ultimately, we do have to acknowledge the Union Army was fighting for something very just. Liberating slaves. And I don't care what anyone says, that's just. But the Confederate soldier who appears does not seem like he was cruel.
These Confederate soldiers just got caught in the crossfire of
these vengeful cat people. And the Confederate soldier is the one who's the most desperate, it seems, to warn Scooby-Doo and the rest to
get out.
Yeah, and he was probably a conscript, and he ends up saying he's the last ghost to disappear, and he says, "Thank you." in such a heartfelt way that you're like, wow. I don't know. I'm just saying, I'd rather look at it as he was not one of those awful soldiers of the Confederate side. And
They were just placed there for
what he believed was protecting local farmers and probably two wealthy ladies, and so it was their duty to protect these ladies, unaware that the ladies were monsters. Which, very complex issue, and this movie does a good job looking at those kind of shades of gray in history, and kind of, they don't even shy away from the grays. They basically present it and say it's a very complex thing here that happened. And this in a kids movie, and in a Scooby Doo movie, this is good storytelling, because they deal with the fact that the pirates were villains. The plantations did not have slaves, but just came because they were trying to get away from pretty much the slave society of the South.
They
just wanted to build a farm,
and people would go there to have legitimate jobs,
but they were all slaughtered. Then the Confederate soldiers, when they came along, there was another plantation apparently.
They had to hold the post,
but they were slaughtered to a man, unaware that they were, like I said, I think they thought they were also protecting two defenseless ladies. And obviously they didn't realize what they were protecting. And so that's the backstory of the island on the bayou that the Mystery Inc. gang shows up for, to try to crack the mystery of. And throughout the movie, you have what out to be villains, but are in some ways the redeemed souls of the dead, and even some innocent people who are just vacationing.
Some tourists probably attracted to paranormal haunted houses.
Others apparently did not know it was supposed to be haunted. And if you look at the number of vacationers, they number the hundreds.
There were even some prohibitionists.
Yep. So you have hundreds of these innocent people. Like, the pirates and the Confederate soldiers are one thing. And here's the thing. Some of the pirates were probably not entirely guilty. Those that were left on the ship were not guilty of the crimes that were done to these people here. Now, they might be guilty of other crimes, but in the context of this island, they are innocent, but they paid the price for it as well. Everybody who came to this island, and here's the thing, you even notice a few children who were zombies. So these ladies went bonkers, and they slaughtered all these hundreds of people so that ultimately, yeah. So at the end of the film, though, you've got, well, Shaggy and Scooby who just get back on the boat. I get the feeling they're probably going to move to the local neighborhood where Velma lives, and probably start working for her, or settle in as, like, across the street as a pizzeria or something. I could see them opening up a pizzeria or something.
Probably going to be their own best customers.
Yes. As for Velma, she's apparently returning to her shop with Neville, who's accompanying her, because, like, it's interesting that they gave him an arc where he seemed to over-aggressive, never argued when characters suspected him, realizing they have good reason to suspect me. Everybody's a suspect, even me. And then he saves Velma a few times. She apologizes to him at one point. And then when he explains, like, he cracks almost a piece of poetry, and he explains, I got into this. No, he complains, my superiors won't even believe me. No, he's like, and much as Daphne says, hey, you want to get on TV? He seems like, he's like, yeah, right. He seems a little defeated, where he's like, I spent months here, and what do I have to show for it? I don't have the criminals. I don't have a story. So essentially, he's in a situation where he's basically going to get fired. So, yeah, he's like, but I got into this because I originally wanted to be a detective novelist. But obviously, like, I wanted to be a detective. I then decided I want to be a detective. That hasn't worked out. So Velma offers, like, I own a bookstore, and offers to set him up with a publisher, which, and it's very strongly implied the two do get together, which, like, it's actually, he's probably the one character we see very little of, but the little we see, I could see him with Velma more than any of her other love interest across all the years, because he seems like he's got the soul of a poet, as Velma puts it, and I do think that fits with Velma. She's so logical she might need a poet instead of an engineer or something. Because she's the engineer.
She needs someone who could keep up with her intellectually to mentally stimulate and challenge her.
But
that's why she got bored in the beginning.
She also needs someone physically fit who can kind of get her out of trouble, because she does tend to go sniffing for trouble. As for Daphne and Fred, it's outright shown they get together. But those two got a great arc. Daphne's filled up her hunger for the supernatural because she was hungry for it. And Freddy manages to finally rouse himself and find the courage to ask the girl out that he really wanted. And rather than, I think, Lena? I can't remember. Yeah, like he flirted with the one girl, but it seems like he was really trying to work up the courage to ask out Daphne. So we've got an arc for just about every character, and we find closure with all of them. And we get the sense that they're basically going to go back to that town not Daphne. Why do I keep doing that? Velma lived in, and going to settle pretty much on that street block. And at least that's the impression I got. And honestly, I really like the sense of closure surrounding this film. So let's rate this film. I'm actually going to say this is pretty much, I don't know, maybe a 4. It's the perfect Scooby Doo film.
A 4? I mean, what do you have to complain about?
The only thing I can almost think of is the one fisherman and his boar. They kind of get annoying.
Yeah, they're just there. I understand you need extra suspects.
But, yeah, but even then he does, like you said, he serves the role of extra suspect. But anyways, that's all I've got in me right now for this. So don't forget to, scream and howl at that subscribe and like button if you enjoyed the video, in order to stay tuned for our next content.
Scooby Doo!